Kia ora mai tātou katoa. I te tuatahi ka tukunata mihi ki tō tātou nei pai whakawairua, arā ko Anna Buchanan, nā ia te hauau mihi o te pātaka o Rākau hautu kei roki i a koe e mara, e te huaka. Anō nei aku whakaaro, aku hauau mihi ki ngai tuāhuriri, ko tuāhuriri ki uta, ko tuāhuriri ki tae, ko tuāhuriri te mana whenua, ko tuāhuriri te mana moana hoki. Huri nei, tēnei ruma o tātou, kia koutou, ka rakatira he whakatū, tēnei kaupapa o tātou, arā ka piki me ka heke, anō nei ka me pēhea rā ka mea hei whakahāhā ai tō tātou nei wāi, tō tātou nei whenua o tira tō tātou nei whenua. Tō tātou nei takata e noho ana ki te whenua. Kia ora mai tātou katoa. Good morning everybody. Fleeted as I am, I arrived with 4 minutes to spare, having done the morning drop-off slightly earlier than usual. Big mihi to Hohepa Kohanga Reo for allowing me to get the kids in earlier. And big mihi to Judith, my good friend. And I'm casting my eyes across the room already, and I'm noticing a lot of people that I'm good friends with as well. So e hika mai as I prepare myself for this kōrero, ko waiau, who am I? Ko te ahu pātiki te mauka, ko Koukourarata witi tāwhita o te awa, ko makawhiua te waka, ko Kāti hui kai tapu, ko kaitahu kati māmoe me waitaha, ētahi waku iwi, ko Mananui Ramsden tōku e kua. Hey, so my mountain is the handsome fella parked up over there on the Banks Peninsula called Te Ahu Pātiki. Some might know of it as Herbert. My river is the ancient and small river called Koukourarata, and I have many Hapū and many Iwi connections. Primarily, I stand on a foundation of my hui kaitaka, as well as my kaitahutaka, so on and so forth. Slight twist to the wording. I waxed and waned as to what to say today. I'm mindful that I could probably cover a few topics that would be of relevance to everybody here. I heard mention of farm plans, quite an important kaupapa, very close to my heart. Water, land use, all the things. But actually I thought I'll just shift the dial and I'll talk to you guys about stuff that's not really being talked about, particularly for a really important community, less than 60 minutes away from the second largest city in Aotearoa. Sound cool? Epic. So it's actually Mananui Ramsden water infrastructure equity issues for a rural Māori community. And that's us just parked up out front. So to land this conversation, it's really important to understand where you are. Anna and Chris both made mention that we are here in Te Waipounamu, a little bit closer, we are here in Waitaha, within the South Island of New Zealand. And the authority, the mana of this whenua is Te Tuahuriri, but from a tribal affiliation it is Kaitahu. And our tribal boundaries is up to 80%, up to 80% of Te Waipounamu, the largest landmass of any Māori nation on the planet. And we're not bad looking either. You'll see the little arrow based over there where the peninsula is. That's the home of my people, who I have the privilege to chair, Papa Te Rūnaka, one of 18 that make up Ngaitahu or Kaitahu. And this conversation is going to be rooted in that neighbourhood. Cool. So this is the tribal boundaries. This is the territorial takiwā of Kāti Huikau, and it flies basically across the whole of the northern bays of the Banks Peninsula, across the Summit Road. If one would be in Akorua and looking up at the road that you just came from, you would get a sort of a panoramic view all across where you can see the Summit Road is on. From that Summit Road to the other side is our beautiful neighbourhood. Just picture some of the most unique environments left in the country, remnant native stands of podocarp forest, hardwoods, insects and birds found only on the Banks Peninsula. and an incredibly unique community as well, not just of Māori, but of many migrant communities who have called the Banks Peninsula home for well over 150 years. Typically speaking, it's quite famous for having a strong French community, but there are also Dutch communities on the Banks Peninsula, and there is also German and many, many more. Just to plug this, just to make sure everyone knows, Koukourarata's territorial boundary extends to Te Waihora as well, the lake. So the background, Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is something that is quite a polarising topic in this country right here on this very day, right now. So let's talk about it. I'm a descendant of two people who signed the Treaty of Waitangi, Iwiko and Tikau, both of whom signed it at Takapuneke in Akaroa back in 1840, whereas we saw a commitment, an enduring commitment between the Crown, representatives of the Queen of England, and representatives of Ngai Tahu or Kai Tahu, which here we are standing in front of you today. The intention for this was simply to create space for our new manuhiri, for our new guests, just like today, coming to these lands, so that one can thrive, one can prosper, and one can continue into the future with absolutely everything that one needs. Fast forward a few years, around within the next decade that followed, you started to see the shifting of this process that is colonisation, essentially where the South Island was divided up into 9 different parcels and sold off, often sold off before having consent to do so. I think quite an interesting thing to understand. What saw through that process was essentially 3 or 4 days across the whole of the takiwā where commitments were made to essentially sell up. And then within that was a whole heap of extensions of details of contracts, kind of like activities within our consents to adhere to moving forward. Some of which were the undisturbed access of quantity and quality of fresh water flowing through all non-Mahika kai sites, so anything that has water. Wetlands, lakes, rivers, streams, the ocean, springs, from the mountains to the sea, undisturbed access. Once more, the reservation of education systems and health systems, guys. That topical thing that's going to be removed from our grasps again. Following this process, this essentially saw thousands of native people to their neighbourhood dispossessed. Essentially, what is now coined and famed as SILNA, or the South Island Landless Natives Act. Quite an interesting thing, especially considering when this neighbourhood basically was a pantry of food, and that little lake next to it was a fish basket. So the fish and chip shop and Pack and Save all within a day's walk of each other. Interesting to note that by the turn of the century, there was less than 2% of biodiversity left on the Banks Peninsula, deforested to build Sydney, Melbourne and Christchurch. Interesting little note. Cool enough to know as well, it's now up to 20%, with efforts from us as humans, but also birds, as well as just the natural form and function of our taia, of our environments, slowly making its way back. So that's really heartening. Some immediate challenges is a restriction of the ability to sort of move within the seasons. We work within moon phases. Sometimes the moon dictates us to harvest a certain type of protein. Sometimes the moon dictates to us to actually stay put because the winds are incredible, or the rain, or the snow, or the heat. So we are people who have an intimate relationship with the environment, because to be solely reliant on cultivation in the South Island, unlike our whānau in the North Island, meant we would starve to death. And that's some of the unique characteristics of living in the South, but of course, a lot of our rural folk in the community in the room today completely understand the challenges of being here. So we've lost our ability to sustain ourselves from a traditional perspective. So to land this conversation, here's the reservation. This is Koukourarata per se. Once upon a time was one of the largest populations of people in Te Waipounamu, boasting to have over 2,000 people. In more of a contemporary context, within the last 200 years, it also had 5 churches, 5 different denominations. It had whalers, sealers, and settlers from Europe, from Britain, from the Americas, from Australia. It was the place to be, one of the places to be, if you were to uproot home and come down to these rocks in the South Pacific. Quite an interesting place. On the back of these shifts, on the back of these challenges, we saw things like overcrowding, the overuse of water, putting stress on the system. One of my cousins is always in my ear, and he's got 30 or 40 years worth of military experience, and he would say, if you can control the resource, for example, water springs, you've essentially got control of the battle. And the thing for us is that we lost control of our ability to sustain ourselves. Once more, the environment lost control of its ability to sustain itself. It's an absolute cluster. As you can see on the board, there's some references to some of the challenges that have transpired as a result. The lack of education, opportunity education, roading and transport. If anyone's been over there, it's pretty rough. She's not an everyday kind of a drive for most Kiwis. Communications, as of February this year, we've only got coverage, which is actually a bit of a bad thing, but hei aha tēnā. And sea level rise. So Koukourarata, as I've mentioned, it's 1 hour drive from New Zealand's largest city. It's a coastal region with volcanic landscapes. So it's made up of over, mindful there might be volcanologists in the room, but it's about 12 different lava flows. And if you do go out there, or if you are putting your eyes on it, you'll see a beautiful, distinct characteristic of how it sort of flows down to the sea. So it's come up and it's over time, and it's got this beautiful little raking fall into the ocean, which is distinctively the peninsula. There are areas of exotic pine and pockets of remnant native forest, as I've mentioned, none more so impressive than ours at Koukourarata. Temperate climate, average of around about 10 to 24 degrees Celsius, annual rainfall of 600 mils. She's tough out there, real tough. We've got about 11 streams, 4 that exist all year round, and others of which sort of ephemeral, sort of come and go, depending on what the system's up to. And largely the land use is sort of light sheep, cattle, farming. So, following this interesting period of having signed a treaty, having shared our neighbourhood with our whānau, with our new settler whānau, so the commitment between mana whenua or tangata whenua, the Crown, and then tangata tiriti. So there's 3 parties involved with this conversation. There's us as mana whenua, there's everyone that has come from Britain, and then there's the migrant communities, tangata tiriti, that have come since the signing of the treaty. So already we're having conversations about immigration, already we're having conversations about race relations and commitments and partnerships and co-governance. The situation that transpired was essentially, you'll see up here, there's actually letters, and it's really beautiful because i roto I te reo Māori te katoa, it's all written in te reo Māori. And it's letters to the Crown stating back in some as early as 1909, the other one is at 1925, and it's stating people are drinking the water and dying. The water is so polluted that one can't even drink from it and sustain ourselves. Fell on deaf ears. We even stated our ancestors, all these people that are signed at the bottom, they're all pretty much my great-great-great-grandparents. We asked for sufficient infrastructure back then. the powers that be at the time came in and crunched some numbers and said basically it wouldn't be viable. It wouldn't be viable. Fast forward to when was the Havelock North disaster? Does anyone know? Was it 2013? 12? Somewhere around there. For the first time in Aotearoa, 8 people lost their lives drinking the water. Number of people were hospitalised, and some of whom who have survived have life-limiting disabilities from drinking the water, which is what set about the Taumata Arawai inquiry, and then the centralisation of these infrastructure assets to a third party, or to the Crown really, in an attempt to solve some of these issues. Some of the things on top of my head, the rhetoric you'll hear often is, centralising assets. There's a direct whakapapa, there's a direct correlation between the regions having control of the development of infrastructure and the development of regional economic development. And when you have that kind of power in your hands, it's quite an influential thing, guys. And that's how I see it. That's how someone who has been riding to the Crown for over 120 odd years, 120 odd years, falling on deaf ears. So the question I've got is how long will this take? How long will it take to honour a contract? It's pretty simple. If Judith was once my boss, if I had stuffed up, Judith would be like, look, Mananui, in your contract agreement, you can't be blah, blah, blah. Sort it out. I would have sorted it out. It's not happening. Still not happening. So the current situation, people we're reliant on catching water off our roof, and we have unconsented water takes from a waterway. The same waterway that's completely full of fecal matter and other really healthy, really things. So you'll see on this slide there's some things to decide a course of action on. I noticed actually in your guys' books there's this kōrero about thriving wai, thriving whenua, and thriving communities. Love it. That is epic. If we have a look at something that's with a national policy statement for freshwater management that is actually world class, te mana o te wai, the hierarchy of obligation. Number one, to reserve water for the system on which it needs to be in. Number two, to reserve sufficient water for the system to thrive so it can provide. And then number three, preserve water so that it can actually give to us in our economic needs. Irrigation, farming, so on and so on and so on. So it's albeit that we're a couple of weeks past election and some of the commitments from National and ACT and New Zealand First is to repeal te mana o te wai, it's kind of like shifting the dial on the thinking of thriving wai, thriving whenua, and thriving communities. To me, that's quite problematic when we're looking at progress. Quite problematic. Even more so if this was your family. Climate change. So we're getting sick and tired of doing the asking for permission, so we're just going to go and do it. Ko mātou ke ka rakatira mo tēnei whenua within our Settlement Act, Ngaita who has been afforded rangatiratanga, it's there for everyone to see, taken out after that for any other iwi that settled with the Crown. So what we've done is we've hooked in and we've started having wānanga, having workshops with our people and talking about what's the challenges. So sea level rise is a real risk for us, desertification of our land as well as the impact on our spring sources is evaporating water. Coastal erosion is eroding infrastructure, that same infrastructure we were asking for over 120 years ago. But also like our burial sites, we've got coastal urupa or cemeteries that are eroding and scouring, and our ancestors are now being exposed and spilling out into places where we want to harvest food. So it's quite problematic. Yeah, really positive thing. On this date, the 20th of August 2023, we saw about 30 or 40 whānau members come in, some of whom who never come and get involved, some of whom are the battlers and they're always at every kaupapa, which is really cool. In the room, we've got environmental commissioners, we've got incredible governors, we've got experienced farmers, we've got all sorts of different representatives of society that are ours. It's really beautiful. So perhaps maybe there's some solutions to bespoke localised efforts. So te hurihaka o te ao is something that I call climate change. Hurihaka, it's moving, it's shifting, it's evolving, it's adjusting of our planet. This probably won't play. It's a video, my bro, but if it could play. This is what a place looks like when it hasn't got sufficient infrastructure. That's the one way in to the treaty partner's home with people that still live there. Some of the issues as a result of lack of infrastructure is there's actually no flushing toilets. As I've mentioned, the water take is quite problematic if this is what's happening to your water. So we've got karaua, we've got elders who have no flushing toilets. This is the waterfront of the kind of the main entry point. And if you get a big ocean, if you get like a king tide mixed with a real big flood event, houses underwater. And of course, as I mentioned, it wasn't as if we had a choice where to live. We were put in a reservation, put in a reserve on the back of becoming landless by the Crown. So we're just making do with what we got. Oh, and this one, my bro. This is Koukourarata. This is a real grumpy Koukourarata. That's the one bridge to get in. Just on the side of that bridge, on the side of that is a PVC pipe that big with all of our internet. So good thing we got that reception tower up now. We've got the 5G coming in and brainwashing us. You see what I'm saying, eh? Not all is equal. You can lobby the hell out of the system because democracy works. It doesn't. Especially when we have bias. Especially when we're competing with a massive city that is built on a wetland. Especially when on the Banks Peninsula people are more connected to Littleton or Akaroa. No one cares about a place called Port Levy, Koukourarata. No one really cares about the 4 sites of which Chris has a bound contract by way of treaty partnership to. Interesting. So I'm really interested. If you're going to go have a chat to the bro, can you let him know Mananui needs to talk to him? See, on the left there, that's our shed. Used to be. This is where you'd go and have a tipple. This is where you'd go and have a poo if you needed it. Pretty cool. So the modelling that's currently coming out of Christchurch City Council is saying there's going to be an increase, the number in my head I don't have, over the next 10 years. It's going to look like whatever that number is. It's already happening in our bay, it's already happening in our regions, and this is happening this is the 6th time that a modelling for the next 10 years is taking place. It's already happening. So this is an example of what's happening to our infrastructure today. Within those commitments, within the purchases between the ancestors of mine and the Crown, infrastructure was part of it. Cool. Yeah. So something to share. Earlier on this year, I went over to my cousin Carl Crofts and I. We got invited to the World Water. God, going blank. I went there. Trust me. Kind of like the microbiological world hui. Where all the big V8 brains come into the same room. It was intense. And they're all sort of showing off and speaking their language. 8 days solid. Sometimes 12-hour days of just real academic, like mad respect. I wish I could understand their reo. I wish I could understand the way they operate and the way they think. So impressed, so privileged as well. The theme for the day was valuing Indigenous knowledge systems. Brilliant. We were on Rarakia land in Darwin, in the top end of the Northern Territories, yet we were the only Indigenous group there. Talking about something that we have a whakapapa connection to, the environment. We all do, by the way. We all come from the environment. We all have a responsibility to protecting it, because without it, there's no us. So here is my people. Our registration is actually over 7,000, and we sit within a nation of over 75,000 people, which is kaitahu. So we're nations within a nation. Interesting, eh? Interesting. And to the left here is our po, or our large plinths to share to the world of our credibility, being kaitahu, being hui kai. In the middle we have two haitara. Of course, just like this morning as well, we get our mana from women. We get our authority handed to us by our beautiful women. This is Tu Haitara, and her mana was so great that she had been dead for over 5 generations, but our people still migrated from the Wairarapa, from Te Whanganui Atara, from Kahununu neighbourhood, under her mana. Because they knew as soon as they would come up to the bouncer and check the ID and see Tu Haitara, straight in. So a flotilla of over 200 waka left the north and made its way down to our neighbourhood, where I've just been talking about, and it populated the place because of its abundance of resource. Thriving wai, thriving whenua, thriving communities. So here we are, debatable, somewhere between 400 to 500 years later, 400 to 600 years later, but remembering we also naturalised with the traditional people before us, which is Waitaha, over 1,000 years old. All in this neighbourhood that we call Ōtautahi, that we call Waitaha, that we call Te Pātaka o Rākai Hautu, the Banks Peninsula, or Te Wāhi Pounamu, Te Wai Pounamu, simply because it is a place that helps people thrive. My friends, we are now at an ecological overshoot crisis. Everything that crosses your desk, that comes into your inbox, conversations that you're having, you actually have the power to create the change that we need. And I'm not even talking about this mob here. I'm talking about us as a nation in some of the largest rocks in the South Pacific. At that same conference that the bro and I went to earlier on this year, we were having a fight and having a blah, blah, blah about our conversation. Quietly next to us was whānau from the Kiribati. Whānau from Fiji. The Kiribati, they're going to be underwater in the next decade. So we've got to act, and we've got to act now. Land use, how do we need to shift it? Because we recognise we need a vibrant economy. Perhaps maybe we can create a hope of work through our freshwater farm plans and shift the dial from where we are to a place where we need to be. Use that as a narrative that becomes a high-value product and sells our product to not only an external market, which is quite problematic, especially when you have a pandemic or when you have world wars, but we create an internal market again, where we feed each other first, we house each other first, then we house and feed the world. Yeah, that's pretty much me. I've got some work to do, my friends. Really keen on getting past the bullshit of central government, because we know that as soon as it goes this way over a few times, it goes that way. And as soon as it goes that way over a few times, it goes this way. When will the real leadership stand up? Because we've got some issues. Kia ora mai tātou.
So we have 10 minutes or so for questions. I've just checked the app. I think I've checked the right app, and I don't see any questions, but until people get used to using that, let's open the floor up for any questions or comments related to Mananui's presentation.
And feel free to give me curly ones. What I'm not seeing enough is conversation. People stay firm in their view. We're not going, okay, what's going on, bro, and have a sit down and have a kōrero. So let me know. Kōrero mai.
Simon.
Kia ora.
Ka rawe ki te kōrero. Ko waiahau, ko Simon Tukutuku e noa, ko Hoki Tuku Kāinga, ki te wāna koe te huatā.
Kia ora.
My question simply is I found your kōrero amazing, honest, and ended with a wonderful context of mana motuhake.
Kia ora.
What I would love to know is how can we help? How can we help? That's a simple question. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Simon.
Hi.
Tēnā koe, Simon. Anō nei, piraki au ki te whakanui ai a koe, ki te tū, me te kōrero i roto i te reo Māori, te reo tuatahi o tēnei whenua. Tēnā koe e mara. I just want to acknowledge your efforts and your ability to command both languages, because that's brilliant. That there is part of the journey that I think we need to understand and overcome. By 2040, there's going to be over 1 million Māori speakers in this country, so pretty cool. How can you help? Relationships. Relationships really matter. And when we're waxing and waning around giving effect to treaty principles or considerations to treaty principles and getting really scared about it, or can we have a co-governance thing? No, we can't. When really all it is an advisory board to the decision makers, we still have no governance. I think we have the ability for ourselves to stand in our own mana motuhake. Each and every one of you have mana motuhake, not just me. You have mana. You have whakapapa. You can stand in your own mana and your own whakapapa and create relationships with these communities when you know that they're disadvantaged from a system that won't ever advantage them. Now you've seen, now you're responsible. Whatever comes on your desk, as I said, question it. Talk to your superior around what are we doing for mana whenua, let alone our migrant communities, let alone our non-Māori communities. Just understand that we have an opportunity as a nation, because we've done it before. We've done it through women's suffrage. We've done it through civil rights. We've done it through multiple world wars and conflicts. We've done it, and we almost did it over the weekend. We almost did it over the weekend. Our women are already doing it, but we never talk about it. We're a nation and we're strong enough. I feel like we pay too much attention, we give too much weight to politicians. Struggling to see good leadership at the moment, and I'm happy to be central politics, because I believe in us. Probably not much words. If you have a marae near you, if you are responsible for mana whenua near you, go and say hello. Sometimes you're going to get your butt kicked. I do it. I get my butt kicked every week. I keep turning up. Relationships get outcomes.
Kia ora koutou. Is that working? Sorry. Ko Shante Kona Kingi tōku ingoa, no tai tokiro no kainga. NRC is who I work for as a kaiwhiri iwi tona, to help engage our people in our process. But I'm just curious about the modelling. Like you mentioned, there was modelling done. I'm just curious, like the outcome of that modelling, what were the supposed impacts that were discussed with the whānau hapū or your marae. Just looking at your videos, it's nothing that we're not used to at home.
Right now.
Yeah, they're living it now. Well, we're down here just got a bit of hay fever. They're up there with trees falling around them.
This year?
Yeah.
18 weather events this year?
Yeah. Well, we've rained for 2 years. So, and where I live, we flood just constantly and cuts up our tona, because it's heavily tent by farming. But I'm just curious about the modelling, because I guess the big question for us, which is a courageous conversation we need to have as tangata, is in some places we're going to need to look at relocating or...
Hara.
Yeah, and I mean, like your videos are quite, they're real, so you're facing a realness every time you're getting hit by weather events. So I'm just curious, is the modelling telling you that you're getting, or that the impacts?
Yeah, I would say that the modelling that we're receiving currently right now, firstly, we haven't had an opportunity to really participate in the science around it.
Okay.
That mātauraka and that Western science interface is lacking. There are regional councils and district councils and city councils in Te Waipounamu, all of which are at varied stages of treaty responsibility. Not only that, levels of various stages of ability under the pump. So what we did is we drew on what we have through ESR, we drew on what we have from Niwa, we drew on what we have from Christchurch City Council and Environment Canterbury, and we just put it all on the paper, put it all on the wall, and tried to translate it for our elders and our kids, and then correlate it to what we're actually experiencing, because that's the piece. There's such a disconnect between us and actual tai.
That's really interesting, because I guess a part of my role in council is to break down the science for our people to understand, how water is moving, how climate change is actually impacting us. And by breaking it down, it makes more sense. We see it every day in our taiao. By breaking down the science, it makes more sense, and it makes those courageous conversations inform ourselves why we're creating these conversations for our next generation, because they need to understand that whatever we do in our time, our grandchildren are going to say, or great-grandchildren are going to say, what the hell was my koro thinking for us to do that? So the science that we are breaking down today for us up in Taitokiro is those particular conversations. And we lobbied to, as a part of the Rivers team and our land and management team, we lobbied to government for our people. And we were quite successful as our people rolling out knew they were not rolling back in, so they were happy to throw money at us. But in saying that, it just allows us to actually do the courageous things and actually start fixing some of these things. So I'm really quite disheartened that we hear a lot of things about Ngāi Tahu, great stuff up north, and because you're settled iwi and all this sort of stuff, I see these things and I can see what's not working. And I think your regional councils, ECAN and that, they have a rivers team, they have a massive one. So they need to be able to, they need to connect so they can break down the science. But yeah, kia ora koutou.
Tēnā koe marama. All the best with that, because that's not an easy position for you either.
No, but it's a real one.
All right.
Yeah.
Any last questions for Mananui?
One more real curly one. And then I gotta go.
I've got one on Slido,
Oh, wicked.
I think.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, yes, and yes. The region's on a journey. From a treaty governance perspective, it started with the Canterbury Water Management Strategy over 2012 maybe, what saw the formalisation of this thing called the Tuia Agreement between Environment Canterbury and the 10 respective Papatipu Rūnaka of Kaitahu. What followed from that was the development of 10 water care groups or water zone committees that had representation of mana whenua and land owners and leadership in the same thing. They basically developed the zipper addendums, the land and water regional plans that have got us to this point. Some of the real cool things outside of that was the development of farm plans, which saw the introduction of Mahika kai or Mahinga kai for the first time in history, being the pivoting point, the traditional systems of resource management. That was a pivotal difference between whether you would be compliant or non-compliant. So we've had some growth. To be real honest with whomever wrote this thing, the real muddying of the water, tēnā koe bro, the real muddying of the water has been central government and the lack of clarity around direction. Next thing you know, you've got a national policy statement for freshwater management 2020 with some really cool things on it that has been through a democratic process, and then opposition politics posturing and developing rhetoric. All of that impacts each and every one of us. Not only us from the mana whenua perspective, but every staff member sitting in council. I used to work at council, and it was stressful. People were scared to make action or make decisions for fear of having it repealed or getting it wrong. So what's going on? Not a lot anymore. I'm a treaty partner that sits on the council now at Te Rōputuia, and the conversations we're having in that space is actually pretty cool. Despite what's happening in central government, we've got an interesting cross-section of representatives of the community. Some have blue collars, some have red collars, some have green collars, some have no collars, some have taonga, all of whom have a heart for the taia, all of whom have a heart for the people. So again, I think what we need to do is we need to realise our own mana motuhake, our own self-determining autonomy, and just go do some good stuff and tell the story. Be your own cheerleader, be your own champion, and I believe that noise will outweigh the uninformed opposition rhetoric, which actually has too much sway over our people and legislation.
I think we'll wrap it up now. Thanks, Paul.